Well, hi everyone, and welcome once again to Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Tim Miller. G'day, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, going pretty well, Aaron. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. Well, we're going to continue this journey of Division 296, and today we have seen the Treasurer introduce this bill into Parliament. So, hot off the press, we do have, of course, today's session where we look at what in theory we've seen from this consultation process, which, as we know, Tim, was extremely short and over Christmas, and try and understand what has changed, if anything, where we go from that exposure draft that we saw, the submissions that were ultimately made, to where we land today. So what can you share with us?
Right. Well, I mean, it would be, we've been talking about this for quite some time, Aaron. So, if we talk through this with some form of smile on our face, it's not through appreciation that the law has landed. It's more that it feels that we've been there, done that all before. And when we talk about short consultation periods, this was actually a long one. They gave us 4 weeks. It was just that the industry was closed for 2 of those weeks. And from a timing point of
Most
view,
of the
and
country was closed for 2 weeks. Let's be honest.
correct, including all of Parliament. And the regulator. But the other thing was I was at breakfast on Sunday morning, I think it was, when I received a message from yourself, and I thought, oh wow, I've got an important work message coming through at breakfast on a Sunday, and it was the legislation's going to land this week, which of course I was very excited about because I'm doing a webinar on it this week as well. But it's like, well, I wonder how hard they've listened. And to be fair, the legislation did reference that they'd been through consultation. But I feel that it was a little bit like every other consultation on Division 296, where it's ended with, here's something we've prepared earlier. And albeit, yes, they've put some, maybe a little bit more detailed explanation in some of the areas that there was some uncertainty about. But I think all of the questions that were raised by all of the parties through their submissions largely have been, look, maybe not ignored, but maybe have been brushed aside due to the desires of Treasury.
Yeah, and when we talk about the consultations, we're referencing quite clearly the SMSF-based consultations,
Correct.
as opposed to the broader set of consultations or submissions that were made around the consultation. So I think, Tim, one of the important things that we've been able to pull out is they've given us some more context is probably the best thing that we could assess this as. So let's talk about some of those items where we may have a little bit more meat on the bone to understand this. In some instances, it's in essence going to come back to the way the regulations are issued in the first instance. But what are some of the things that stood out for you that were highlighted in here that we now know a little bit more about?
Yeah, look, I guess I'll start with one that we've spoken about this in our Feeling Smarter sessions, and we've spoken about the fundamental difference to do with the death of a member and how that was previously an exclusion, where if the individual had passed away during the year, like before the last day of the financial year, that they wouldn't be subject to Division 296. Now, we speculated whether that was a deliberate exclusion or not, and it appears on face value that it 100% was a deliberate exclusion. And it's the conversation piece around that is really, well, under the old unrealised gain model, the regulator was collecting the revenue along the way whilst that member was alive, whereas under the realised gain model, well, those investments are not being realised until potentially the death of the member, and so in the year of death is almost effectively the collection point, and so, whether we like it or not, that makes some form of sense, right? But where our fear then arose with regards to death benefits, well, death benefits don't get paid out that quickly all the time. And so if somebody's money is still sitting in super and we're moving to a concept of the highest of starting balance versus ending balance from a financial year point of view, we could see a Div 296 liability being established for somebody who had passed away in a prior year. Now, what we've seen is clarity that your total super balance effectively dies with you, right? So one of the clarifying points in the EM is that the TSB dies with you, and so that's where the relevance of the balance at the start of the year certainly comes into play, because in that year of death, they're going to look at your starting balance, not your end balance, because you don't have an end balance ultimately, right? Or you don't have an end balance subject to Div 296. So that gives us some comfort that after that year, whilst you will have a liability for that year, you won't have a liability for future years for that individual.
Yeah, so if that benefit is being contested and the ability to pay that as soon as practicable may draw out over multiple years, there's not going to be a carrying balance in there that in essence is going to be subject to Division 296. As you said, the year of death there will be, because as we know, and in essence, this has been retained, even though there was a preference for it not to be retained by submissions, to take the higher of the opening and closing balance. And that then naturally leads into the fact that, you know, we will have differences between the reversionary nature of a pension, because in essence, you may end up with the balance of the deceased member using the opening balance, and then the reversionary being the closing balance, and therefore you can have multiple liabilities ending up in the 1 year. We would naturally look at actuarial requirements with that too, but we need to see a little bit more around that to understand that further as well.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a bit to come out in that whole attribution of income. So once the income is determined, then attributing it between members in a multi-member fund, particularly where you've got part year members, which has always been a year of concern. If you've got someone coming in who's liable and the income is based on the income for the year, but it's then all attributable based on how long you're in the fund or how long you're a member, then you know there's going to be some pain points in and amongst all those calculations, but hard really to go through the nuts and bolts of that without the final regulations that will sit across that. But it also, and you and I were speaking about this, and we've spoken ad nauseum about, you know, effectively what you were just saying before with a reversionary pension, and that is that, you know, in our long-standing debate of reversionary versus non-reversionary pension, you know, if you're just doing reversionary for the convenience of it, or Division 296 makes it an inconvenient benefit, right? So you always have your requirements for reversionary in blended family situations and other scenarios like that. But if it's just because, you know, we want to make sure that it 100% goes to my surviving spouse who I've been married to for 50 years without ever having anybody else in my life type scenario, then discretion in this instance can be certainly beneficial from a first year calculation quandary.
Yeah. So any other items before we kind of move into where to next from here that I guess piqued your interest from that first blush of what we've seen with the introduction of this new bill?
Look, probably that nothing further other than obviously, you know, reconfirming the CGT position, the all or nothing approach from an assets point there, I think was a significant thing, given that a number of other I felt scenarios were provided to the government with regards to how that would operate. So clearly it's, you know, full steam ahead with regards to the way the government want this implemented. You know, all about thresholds, indexation. Of course, the key is, you know, when the exposure draft was released, we did not have indexation of the transfer balance cap, and so we all felt there was great comfort around 2 million versus 3 million versus 10 million to now be in a situation where we're going to have 2.1 versus 3 versus 10. And so we're going to have not anomalies, but we're just going to have things indexed differently.
And it kind of feels like I said, we'll give you an opportunity to read and prepare some stuff, but in essence, we gave you the concession by that version 1 ultimately being defeated. So, so the reality is if there's something that is plainly obvious on the end of my nose, tell us, and we will try and redress that. But the concepts that we've now built is really the way that we're going to move forward.
That's right. The industry as a whole, not just SMSF industry, the industry as a whole fought hard for unrealised capital gains and indexation. They got them both. This is now the measure we've landed with, and we have to now work within these confines.
Yeah. So now the where to next, because this week House of Representatives is sitting, so we've seen that introduced into Parliament. We will expect that to go through without any major issues. Of course, that's House of Representatives is controlled by the Labor Party, but we don't then see the Senate sitting until March. Now, I think 3 out of the 4 weeks we have the Senate sitting throughout March. They don't have control of the Senate, and they only need the support of the Greens to be able to see this through. Now, I have read that the Greens were frustrated in terms of the fact that version 1, Labor backed down on that. They wanted to see revenue collected through unrealised gains, through the what they would call grossly large amounts of balances in superannuation, that the tax concessions are far more than they should be getting, and therefore reallocating from those collections of revenue into things such as housing and so forth as well. So is it going to be as straightforward now as we think, or could the Greens just dig their heels in a little bit to see what they could get? Noting originally that they did, to get passage on the first lot of rules, they wanted to get superannuation on paid parental leave and did get that in the first instance. I'm sure Labor's going to remind them of that as part of the negotiation. But I think it'll be an interesting watch over the next few weeks to see, once that goes into the Senate and is tabled, to see whether they have the numbers just to allow it to go through, or they'll need to do a little bit of negotiation along the way.
Yeah, look, and again, I shouldn't be smiling, but I look at a party that wanted 45% or 48% tax for everybody. They wanted non-means tested income for all. So the Greens and their tax policies have been interesting, to say the very least, over the last 20 plus years that we've been focusing on self-managed super. So, I tend to take a lot of it with a grain of salt in regards to that a lot of it is bluster with reference to, we're going to stand up for this sort of stuff, but whether they stand up for this sort of stuff is another issue. And I think not only have we seen the paid paternity leave style paid the leave stuff with super guarantee, but we've also seen the low income super tax offset being introduced as part of this measure, which is certainly then something that Labor can then turn around and go to all the parties, well, you're not supporting low income earners because you're not supporting this particular measure, which is giving some additional tax back in that regard. So I think they've been quite smart in how they've done that from an introductory point of view. Whether I agree or disagree is irrelevant to that situation. Yeah. So look, I think we'll see typically. There's a lot of noise going on in Parliament at the moment, and the House of Reps is an easy pass because I'm pretty sure there's no opposition right now from everything we're hearing. So the Senate, it's a new Senate, of course, from last lot of negotiations. So, how the industry addresses that versus how government address that with regards to whether they do need any of the crossbenchers or whether they actually know that they've got the support of the Greens and the Greens are just going to fight for the sake of it, just to show that that they didn't agree with everything, but they want this measure in because of the higher tax collection point.
Yeah, the only thing that piques my interest and flags a concern is the Greens have always had a view around limited recourse borrowing, for example. So if they can't get changes somewhere, will they want to see something else as a bargaining tool to get this stuff through? So not to say that it will happen, but it would be interesting just to see how these negotiations play out. As I said, I would suspect we'll see that over the next few weeks before the Senate sits, and whether we see it given passage through and therefore receive royal assent and move on. We might see that go through, as I said, unchanged, or we might see it go through unchanged, but there might be some other factors that might be at play to appease the Greens to get that passage in the first place. So there's definitely a watch on this over the coming weeks as we now sort of follow its passage, and we look at a commencement date from the 1st of July 2026.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, isn't it? We will look towards all of that, and as we spoke about recently in one of these weekly catch-ups, we talked about the fact that the government promised no changes to super in their first term, so we don't know what further super policies. We did see some stuff around child abuse and release of monies to pay off debts, which is a more broader superannuation issue. We saw a paper of that released recently. So, we don't know what else they've got up their sleeve and what else they're potentially negotiating with parties. So time will tell.
No, absolutely. Well, naturally, this again is a huge part of our upcoming SMSF days. We do have a number of tickets remaining. They are dwindling very quickly. We are at record numbers, of course, given the context of these Division 296 tax laws. We'll be going through these various stages and looking at the various topics that we have not only been discussing in these events, but a few other ideas that you and I, Tim, have come up with as well. So a big thank you to you, Tim.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. Have a great rest of the week. Take care and bye for now.
See you all.